Hi everybody and welcome to Heel Heat. My name is George Coles, and on this show we're doing How I Would Have Booked. The topic for this How I Would Have Booked the return of Andy Kaufman, or Andy Kaufman back from the dead, however you want to call it. We are going to get into the realm. Obviously, we have a guy coming back from death, and a lot of people think his death was a hoax, and still there are people to this day that believe he's still alive somewhere, so there's a little bit of reality in this. The reason for this and the topic here, our good friend Bucky749 recommended this quite a bit ago, actually. It's taken me a while to get around to it. And to really figure it out, I've struggled with figuring out a story that not only makes sense with somebody coming back from the dead, but also fits into what the company, because we're going to do this in USWA, what the company was doing around the time. There are going to be some cases where maybe someone's alignment on heel face is a little bit different in this than it was in real life. The timing is going to be USWA starting in July of 1991 is where we pick up, and we're going to go from there. Starting off on the July 27th Saturday morning show, we get the main event as Jerry Lawler versus Bill Dundee. During the match, Jerry Lawler gets attacked by Leatherface, who at the time I believe was being played by one of the Godwins. I could be wrong. There were a couple people that played Leatherface in USWA, but he is based off of the classic Texas Chainsaw Massacre character. Leatherface gets ran off. We go off of the air with that being the ending of that show. Coming up the next week, Lawler is being interviewed this is August 3rd, 1991. Lawler is being interviewed. He calls out Leatherface. As he's calling out Leatherface, from behind, Nightmare Freddy comes up and attacks him. Nightmare Freddy, famously Doug Gilbert, who, if you're not familiar with the name, is based off of Freddy Krueger. So we're starting to see a little bit of a theme here with the two different horror genre-based characters. And this was at the time where they were using a lot of these type characters. I believe the God of the Volcanoes was here soon. I forget what his name was. But there was a few horror-themed guys that were coming right around this time. Off of that, that builds to a show for that Monday on August 5th, which is at the Mid-South Coliseum. We have Lawler and Dirty Dutch Mantell going up against Leatherface and Nightmare Freddy. After Lawler and Dutch pick up the win, they get attacked by the Mummy, a guy dressed up like a mummy, and he throws a fireball at Jerry Lawler, which, of course he does, because it's Memphis, and fireballs get thrown in Memphis like sun comes up in the rest of the world. It happens all the time. Going from that, our next studio show on August 10th, Dutch Mantell is doing an interview saying that Lawler got badly burnt. He's going to be out of action for a little while due to the fireball, which gives us a little bit of a respite from the angle while Lawler heals up. They take a couple weeks off. We come back on a August 31st show. The villains are attacking Dutch Mantell after a match that he had in the ring. The locker room comes out. The villains are fending off all of them. The villains being Leatherface, Nightmare Freddy, and the Mummy. And as a surprise, Jerry the King Lawler runs out, makes a save. After that, they go to the announce table with Lawler and Dutch there. Lawler says, "Me and Dutch, we're going to face off against you three, and we got a friend that's going to come in and help us. Monday night, we want to match me, Dutch, and our surprise partner going up against you, Leatherface, Nightmare Freddy, and the Mummy. And to make it better, if one of you guys win, I'll retire, and whoever gets pinned on your side, if you lose, you have to take off your mask. Whoever takes the fall," which sets up a match for that coming Monday, September 2nd. We get the Leatherface, Nightmare Freddy, and the Mummy going up against Jerry Lawler, Dutch Mantell, and the surprise partner. The surprise partner is the Boogie Woogie Man, Jimmy Valiant. I knew you thought I was going to say Andy Kaufman there, but I threw you a swerve ball, or curveball. Either way. So we get kind of three of the classic guys in Memphis at the time, Lawler, Dutch, and Valiant. All three of these are absolute legends on one team. They pick up the win when the Mummy takes a pinfall. As per the setup to the match, the Mummy has to unmask. Lawler, Dutch, and Valiant hold him there while Dutch and Valiant hold the Mummy down while Lawler takes off his mask. The big reveal, Andy Kaufman. And being as this was being taped, as most of the matches in the Mid-South Coliseum were, the crowd goes insane. They give the tape out to different media outlets. It gets major media coverage. It's on CNN, they're talking about it. They're talking about it on Entertainment Tonight, which, if you're not familiar, was basically the TMZ of the time. Every news channel is leading with the story that Andy Kaufman's alive, that his death was a hoax, which leads us to the next show on September 7th. Back in the studio, Andy Kaufman comes out to start the show. First up, they get record ratings. It gets the biggest ratings Memphis Television's ever done, which says a lot because they got a ton of really great ratings. He comes out and he basically says why he's back. He's back to get back at his one true enemy, the one guy that always did him wrong. He has been planning this forever. This whole thing was a plan. He followed the teachings of Machiavelli, not that one. Although, the reason that a lot of people think that Tupac is still alive is because he changed his name to Machiavelli, which is based off of Niccolo Machiavelli, who we're talking about here, because the Tupac thing wouldn't happen for another half a decade, who famously faked his death and hid out for 7 years, which is why we're in 1991, 7 years after Andy Kaufman's death. Kaufman talks about Machiavelli, how he's smarter than Lawler, how he's smarter than the people of Memphis, and it was time to come back when Lawler was at his weakest, just telling everybody that he's going to be there to take over the company. From there, we get that gives us everything we need to know about the storyline. Their feud continues on. Part of that, and this era in 1991, we're right in the middle of the pairing with World Class Championship Wrestling had kind of fizzled out and failed a year before, and we're not yet. We're about a year off from Jerry Lawler going and working with WWF and also USWA working with WWF. So we're in that area where they're still on their own and not quite tied to anybody else. The reason this is what makes it so exciting. This starts a bidding war from the different cable companies. We get E-Channel, ESPN, WGN, and Sports Channel all fight for the rights to air USWA wrestling, so they could air Lawler, so they could air Andy Kaufman, they could air the feud. It drives everything into a frenzy. They sign with one of the companies, thus creating the third promotion, or the third major promotion in the country on national TV, giving WCW and WWF a run for their money. The first time we've seen that since the AWA, and to an extent the USWA with their ESPN, but that was more of the world class. Global was on ESPN, but they didn't quite get the eyes that this would get because of the return of Andy Kaufman, the fans that he's going to bring back to see what the hell happened. How did this happen? How did a guy that we thought was dead come back from the grave? Thus making USWA the third promotion in the country and giving it a shot in the arm that it desperately needed to go on. And from there, who knows what happens? Maybe it overtakes WCW. It becomes the premier wrestling company of the South. Maybe it overtakes WWE and becomes a premier wrestling company in the whole world. You got to remember, in 1991, WWE wasn't as firmly the number one. They were definitely number one, but they weren't so firmly entrenched in number one that there wasn't any kind of a opposition. Like now, they have opposition with the AEW, but AEW is definitely number two. TNA was always number two. There was a time where WWE or WWF at the time and WCW went back and forth, and that's only a few years after this. So who knows what happens if you throw a third company. We have ECW starting up in a couple of years. What if Eddie Gilbert being the conduit between ECW and USWA, what if they combine together and make a third super company when that happens? A whole bunch of different things could happen based off of this one instance and change the history of wrestling. Who knows where we'd be now? Maybe we'd be looking at it in a total different light. Maybe the wrestling world would be totally changed and we'd be seeing wrestling that was more based off of the Memphis style. That's the intriguing things about how I would have booked, how it would have changed the wrestling world. But with that, this is my opinion on how I would have booked the return of Andy Kaufman, how I would have brought him back. Let me know what you think. hit me down here in the comments, hit that like button, share, subscribe if you haven't, and if you made it all the way to the end, throw something about Andy Kaufman that you like in the end, whether it be the appearance on Letterman, his taxing appearances, his comedy routines, his wrestling. Throw something in the comments about Andy Kaufman so I know you made it to the end. With all that being said, my name is George Coles, and this has been another episode of How I Would Have Booked.